So today we are talking about monetization and some possible pivots within Square Enix. I posted a full reaction over to Gaming Kinda Reacts. That should already be live. Link will be in the description below, as well as a link directly to this letter, because I am going to skim through this rapidly so we can talk about the area in question. They do say, they're looking at kind of the meta and what that means. They're looking into technologies such as cloud to both enable the distribution of and possibly make things more accessible to a wider range of people. I'm all for this. They've talked about last year they touched on some AI advancements, and they were saying, hey, that is going ahead as planned, and we are hoping that that'll primarily focus on natural language processing, world models, and simulation technology. But there is a section on NFTs, non-fungible tokens, things of value that cannot be replaced, effectively art but in the digital world. But possibly with something such as VIP access tied to it or something like that, such as, for an example, what if Brian could sell his 1.0 status to Final Fantasy XIV, where you could get the tattoo on your character even though your character isn't from 1.0, because he sells that. There's a limited number out there, and that becomes a sellable token that can be assigned to an account. And this is focused heavily on blockchain games. Be they single-player or online games have traditionally involved a unidirectional flow where creators such as ourselves provide a game to consumers that play them. And what they're saying is they'd like to introduce possibly the play-to-earn concept as something that might add further momentum to how people support more self-sustaining game growth. He does believe the majority of players voice their reservations, but that there is a certain number whose motivation is to play to contribute, and that he believes that user-generated content has been solely for the self-expression and not incentivized or rewarded for their creative efforts, which I think bypasses entirely platforms such as Reddit, Discord, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, where people are generating content, helping each other, through goodwill and volunteer spirit, creating entertainment, creating guides, sharing information. Sometimes that's being part of a community. Sometimes that's being the creator themselves. There have been plenty of ways that are incentivized in a variety of ways, including but not limited to money. That are out there, but what those things don't have in common is that those are not under the Square Enix header. And they go on to say that they feel that finished products are centralized games, and they would love to move to a ecosystem of decentralized gaming, which I think the best case is something like Minecraft, where it largely moves outside of the original space, more sandbox style games, but does extend to the amount of community and support that has grown around, various other games. When we look at games that have just kind of blown up from time to time, back in the day with Flappy Bird, or more recently with, I'm drawing a blank on the name of the game, not Fall Guys, but the game where we try to decide who the murderer is. These games can have communities form around them that are well beyond what the devs could have intended. I think when we look to the stores and stuff, there are ways to have the money go back, and we've had in the past where games like Final Fantasy XIV have said they want to add an EU data center, so they're adding an online store, and we can support that cause. We have seen gaming raise a huge amount of money for various charities over the years. I think this bypasses a lot of this, but when you say centralized versus decentralized, where I start to struggle with that is that even in my examples, it's really hard to name a game that can transcend the company that owns it, that can transcend, the name at the top here, the header. And so it's always going to be centralized. No matter how much you invest in this, if Square Enix shuts said game or ecosystem down, you're screwed. That's a lot harder to do with something like one of these coins. That's a lot harder to do unless a government comes in and tries to regulate it out of existence. that stuff in theory starts to transcend banks, governments, the creators themselves, and that's just not true of something like a game. So I think there's a lot of concern here where social literacy and acceptance of crypto assets is not going to overcome this. And it has a lot to do with implementation. You see games like Guild Wars that are heavily microtransaction based and have an ArenaNet partner program to have a select few rise up into a tier where they get direct support from the game to help support its community and foster that, but are outside of ArenaNet's control. You have games like WoW and EVE Online that have the Plex and WoW token, where there is kind of an exchange of value there. And then you have games that operate more where Final Fantasy XIV does, where it's just a cosmetic only space, and you're either supporting the game on a monthly basis or a buy-to-play basis. And there's a variety of monetization schemes out there. But where people get frustrated is when those schemes change over time or are deceptive, when there is a surprise loot mechanic that is then added to a game. I don't remember people being particularly upset at the loot boxes in Halo 5 because they were operated the same way for the entire billion years that that game was the most recent Halo. And I think that's fine, as opposed to something that feels like it was deceptive. So how does this get added? Is there a new set of properties that come out that are going to be coin based? And, you know, if I don't like what that means, I can just choose not to be involved, because they say this is going to contribute to a wide variety of motivations. But having played the launch of Diablo 3, it's not a wide variety. It's the existing set of motivations, and make direct money for playtime, which incentivizes more RMT, more botting, more obligation to play even when you're not having fun. It gets further from all the core objectives that actually make a community around having fun, having goodwill, volunteer spirit, this healthiness that surrounds gaming communities. It was nothing but further than that. So, or does this build on top of existing communities? If this is successful in some new franchise, say it's Final Fantasy 16 or 17 or some new Dragon Quest game or some new game we've never even heard of on a new IP, does it go back and get integrated into games like Final Fantasy 11, Final Fantasy 14, the next chapter of Final Fantasy 7R, the next Kingdom Hearts game? Does this come back and make its way into the rest of the portfolio? I think that's where a lot of people are really frustrated, and I think there's a lot of valid concern here. There are a lot of silver linings out of the last 2 years that we can get out of being better at work from home and being better at realizing that maybe our job doesn't require us to 5 days a week sit in a commute. Maybe, not all jobs, but maybe your job, you could work home some of the time or a couple days a week, or have more flexibility in what the term vacation means. Or, you know, maybe if you're not feeling well, just stay home all week and work from there. We can be more flexible in that way. But I think that we've also given rise to a number of technologies that could easily be abused. And so NFTs in games is something that I'm immensely concerned about the execution of. And I think it is something that we will look back and know what was good and what is bad. But in the current time, you'll be just taking a risk. You'll be just making a guess of whether or not this is there. And I would like up front to decide when I invest in a franchise or an individual title, is that a game that involves that risk or does it not? If I'm interested in that risk, then let me choose that. But I think largely a lot of us would fall into the majority that would say, hey, if you tell me that up front, I'll watch other people play it. I hope they're having fun, but I don't think that's something for me. And I'm immensely concerned with what this means moving forward. I don't think that these games are well set up to have play to earn not be an abused concept, not be something that just gets taken advantage of. You know, yes, the botters and the streamers who can play 80 hours a week would probably benefit from this. But you know, the certain number of people whose motivation is to, I would love to play Final Fantasy 14 and get paid for playing, and I don't want to have to upload anything to YouTube or Twitch to do it. That group. But what happens to the majority of players that already run a community a certain way? This changes the name of the game. Are they helping you to get money? When you look at things like mentor status in games, they are already an area that is immensely fraught with people abusing the system because they want the reward. It is nice to think that if somebody does something good, they should be rewarded. The problem is that every time we introduce that reward, does it run the risk of saying now people are doing it for the reward and they don't want to do the good thing anymore? If we play to earn, does it become now I'm just focused on the earn and this community is not centered on playing anymore? Games are a chance to escape being out in the rat race of the world. And does that disappear if these games start to be tied to self-sustaining game growth, where it's like, well, I have to play this week because I have to earn my extra Final Fantasy 14 shares because that's how I'm paying for my PlayStation 7. Like, is that where we want to be? I don't think it's where I want to go. I think this has me more concerned than not. Obviously, how they act on this will have a lot of control over that. But I think this has me more concerned than not.